Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. You know, one of the things I love about restoring watches and about doing it for you on this channel are the stories behind these watches. You know, we've got a lot of times watches that belong to a family member or somebody like that, and they can have incredible stories. And this one has one of the most incredible stories I've heard about a watch so far. So this one comes to me from Australia. And a really nice lady named Sandra sent me a message. Her husband had actually seen the channel. And she said, I have a watch that has been sitting untouched and unworking since 1977. And I said, what was the story with this watch? And she said, this is what happened. Her dad was a fisherman. And he woke up on May 16th, 1977, and he checked the conditions to go out fishing. He decided, though, that the sea was too rough and he wasn't going to go out. But he had a friend in town who convinced him to go out because it was his last day of vacation and he wanted to do some fishing. Now, what they didn't know was that a cyclone was quickly moving up the coast. And by the time they got back, the conditions were too rough to try to cross to come back home. In order to try to save the boat and themselves, they decided to take shelter behind Plover Island. And up until about midnight, the people in the village could see the mast lights, but around 1 a.m. they disappeared, assumedly when the boat sank. The next day, the wreckage was seen by local policemen off the beach, but by the time they got there, it had disappeared. 3 agonizing days later, Max's body washed up on the shore. Alvin's body, his friend, was never found. Miraculously, though, he was still wearing this watch when he was found. Now, this watch was taken from him and given to the family, and Sandra's had it ever since, but she threw it in a drawer way back then, and it is in the exact condition that it was when it came off of his wrist after he tragically passed away. Now, the watch hasn't worked since then either, but Sandra saw the channel and thought, you know, maybe I could ask him to help get it running, and maybe I could even leave it to my daughter, you know, so that she might have something to remember her grandfather from. And I said, absolutely, send it in. And that is what you're looking at here. This Seiko from the 70s is the one that he was wearing when that cyclone hit and took down his boat and him and his friend's life ultimately as well. It's a real tragedy. And this is one of the only things left, right? So this is really hitting at that core, that heart of what it means when you hold on to an object that somebody owned and you can feel them there. You can get a sense of connection with them. And we're going to try to restore this for Sandra today and get it back so that she can wear it if she'd like, and so that she can pass it down when she chooses as well. Now, the first thing here is we need to get into the watch. As you can see, I have to use the case opening tool because the rubber ball that I normally use, it's very grippy. It actually wouldn't undo it. And that often means that there's some amount of rust. So what I'm really hoping for is that the movement didn't get flooded when it was in the ocean, because if it did and it's been sitting for that long, it's going to be dust inside, and we'll probably have to buy a whole new one. So let's see what the inside looks like. Wow. That's actually not too bad at all. It looks like this watch held up, and you can look around the rim and you can see the rust there. There is corrosion where the water was trying to seep in, but it looks like the seal held. And as you can see, the crown is rusted or corroded into place here. I'm going to try to see if I can't budge that loose, because we can't take the movement out without taking that out, but it is really firm. Maybe if I wedge it out with a screwdriver. This isn't really like how you want to do it, but not really seeing a lot of great options. Oh, look at this. Okay, it's moving. So I can twist it, which means that it's broken whatever type of corrosion or rust seal that was on there. That's probably the only thing, by the way, that kept it from flooding out, because these watches are water resistant, but they're not, you know, 3 days in the ocean, you know, who knows what can happen, right? But there we go. Oh, that's great news. And look at that. The watch even actually started running a little bit too. Okay, and I can set the hands. Wow, this is fantastic news. If this watch is willing to run, even if it doesn't run well, that means that I might be able to just service it, clean up any of the rust or corrosion that's on there. It's definitely going to need a new crystal. You saw how damaged the crystal got. probably from Max doing his fishing work. That probably had not a lot to do with the salt water or sitting in a drawer or anything, but the crystal looks badly damaged. But at any rate, this could be huge. And I mean, also just the idea of keeping it all original is really appealing here because it's the exact same thing that he wore. Okay, so now we can remove the movement and let's see how the dial looks. Whoa, whoa. That dial's perfect. Oh my, look at that. Oh, it is gorgeous. It looks like it's untouched. I guess this is what happens when one of these sits in a drawer for all that time. There's no even UV that can get to it. Incredible. Let's take a look at it on the time grapher and see how it's running. Ooh, that's no good. Okay, so it's actually just barely running and can't even actually get a consistent trace. Fair enough. Look, as far as I'm concerned, the fact that it's not just completely rusted out is a celebration already. So taking a look at the case, you can see the crystal, as I mentioned before, is badly damaged. Now there's a bezel that goes around the crystal. This actually aids in keeping it watertight. And as you can see, it did its job because that is rust. And that means that salt water got in between that bezel in the case, but it did not leak. That's the key, right? It held its ground and it saved the watch, which is really incredible. I'm going to use a piece of pegwood to try to get some of the larger pieces of debris off here and then see if I can get the crystal out as well. Let's see if it'll come out. Oh yeah, it cracked. So the crystal, clearly having seen better days, probably got brittle from age and also from the maybe even being in the water, who knows. But the truth is we needed to replace that crystal anyway. So it kind of is what it is. When I repair watches like this too, I'll usually send all of the old parts, even if they break like that, back to the owner as well, just so that they have them for, whatever reason. Okay, let's take the hands off. I still cannot believe how gorgeous this dial is. It's held up absolutely wonderfully. Again, sitting in a drawer probably helped. It really did. Like UV is a huge contributor to how dials fade or, deteriorate. Okay, so now we can put the hands away, and it looks like there's kind of a ring that holds the dial in place here, a support for the dial perhaps. And there's a couple of dial feet that we can unscrew to remove it. And there we go. Really incredible. I'm blown away, not only at the condition, but that's just a sweet dial. I mean, that is beautiful. Okay, so now we can start to work on the movement and we'll see if any water did get in, but I don't anticipate it because normally you can see where the water ingress has happened and it's almost always around the crown if it's going to happen. And so you'll see rust in that part of the watch and I don't see any. So I think we're in the clear here as far as major damage goes. Now, as we saw from the time grapher, it really does need a service at the least. But I'm really feeling optimistic now. I think we can get this thing back on Sandra's wrist, and I'm really excited about it. I just almost couldn't believe it when she sent me that story. And she had the news clippings and she was really nice and sent those along as well. And it's weird seeing that kind of stuff. It almost seems like a movie, right? Like it doesn't seem real. And when she sent me the watch and I opened up the package, it felt very real, right? Cause this was his, like, this was no longer just something from the internet or some crazy story or, something that you go, wow, I can't believe that happened. This is very, very real. And of course, for Sandra and her family, it was as real as it gets, right? A true tragedy for them. Okay, taking apart the movement, we have to completely disassemble this whole thing. We do this for a few reasons. Primarily just so that they can be cleaned properly, where when the metal's touching each other, it can be very difficult for the cleaning solutions to get in. That's why we don't put like the whole movement just in the cleaner as it sits, but also because part of servicing a watch is lubricating it properly. We have oils. In fact, when this watch came out, the oils would have been a bit different, but we've got a lot of really high quality synthetic oils that last a really long time now. And I'm going to be replacing the lubricant on this watch with those to see if we can't get it to run a bit better. And then also there's a troubleshooting element to taking apart every single piece. That's the kind of the third reason why we completely disassemble the watch. It's because if there is a part that has wear on it, or like in this case, if there was some rust somewhere, we may not be able to see it. And taking apart the whole thing allows us to examine the parts. You'll sometimes notice when I take parts off of the watch, I'll just take a look at them for a second and I'm just doing a quick visual, just, hey, is there any teeth missing off of this? Like that, right? Is there wear on the bottom of that? I can put any individual part on the, like on the microscope if I feel that there might be something wrong with it. But even just the visual inspection that you do when you disassemble the watch can really help you understand if there's an issue where it might be. Okay, this thing's coming apart nicely. This is a watch that has kind of a lot of functions, actually. I would call this a really good bang for the buck watch from back in the day. This would not have been a cheap watch, but it wasn't overly expensive. Frankly, this is the type of watch that you would expect a fisherman to have, a working person, right? This isn't some fancy office watch, but it's also a nice one. And as you can see, the fact that Max ended up getting this nice watch ended up paying dividends here because it survived, right? It was able to be out in the ocean for 3 days and then in a drawer for 40 years, and it's still here. And that's really a testament to the quality, of the watch itself. And, this is a Seiko. And I think that if you're not really a watch person, you might think, oh, Seiko, like, don't they make those battery watches at the mall or something like that? And it's kind of funny because they do, but they also make watches going all the way up the range. Like, all the way up too. Like, they make watches that cost, $10 or whatever. This one in modern pricing would be, I don't know, somewhere in the $300 to $500 watch, something like that, a good solid runner that you can expect to keep for a while. But they make watches that cost $50,000, like today. And they're all made by Seiko. It's one of the most, they call it, vertically integrated. They have everything to make everything there. Companies, them and Rolex are really the two that do it all themselves. Okay, so the watch is fully disassembled and it's a bit of a mess here. Again, with the case, I'm trying to get the majority of the rust off of it so that I can eventually put the case in the ultrasonic cleaner. And, you want to try to get most of that corrosion off of there so that it doesn't continue and so that you can make a good surface between the bezel and the case itself. Okay, so I was talking about cleaning the watch earlier, and that's what this is all about. I actually have to take apart this barrel with the mainspring in it first. But at any rate, everything is going to go in a basket and it's going to be put into a cleaning solution and then agitated. And that process takes quite a while. You can clean some parts by hand if needed. You can also use an ultrasonic cleaner to clean them in addition to the watch cleaning machine. The watch cleaning machine is mainly just a repeatable process that's fairly quick. So especially for people who are cleaning a lot of movements, that's not really me, to be honest, but it's really convenient. And this is what it looks like. This watch cleaning machine, it predates the watch that we're cleaning by quite a bit, probably 30 years, 40 years. So it's quite old. But it still works totally fine. And it was made really, really well. And this is what it does. That's it. It's a basket that gets plunged down into 3 different solutions and that cleans it up. So as the watch gets clean, I did want to mention that I've got a Patreon for this channel. So if you like my channel and if you want to support what I'm doing here, you can head over to the Patreon. It's patreon.com/wristwatchrevival. And if you sign up, you get a thank you card and a sticker in the mail, no matter what level you sign up for. And I've got a few different levels, and you get access to like the videos a little bit early. I'll take pictures of projects before they go up. So you just kind of get a little bit of an inside track onto what I've got brewing on the channel over there. And I do want to say very much thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. It really means the world to small content creators like me, and I really, really appreciate it. Okay, so here's the watch parts all laid out and clean, and it looks like everything came out really well. I think I'm going to be able to reuse every part here. Normally, you would replace the mainspring kind of as a part of a service, but I'm really putting an emphasis for this watch on originality when possible. So I'm going to just reuse the mainspring. I mean, there's a decent chance that it works fine anyway, just because it hasn't really gotten that much use, but sometimes time can take its toll. So speaking of the mainspring, this is called the mainspring barrel, and this is where it's housed. And the mainspring is for a watch, a big, thick spring that you can wind up and then it wants to unwind slowly over time. And that's what powers everything on a wristwatch, on one of these mechanical ones, everything. If you see the calendar go, if you see the seconds hand moving, the hour hand, anything that you do, if it's like has a stopwatch, we call it a chronograph function, anything like that, it's all coming from a piece of metal that has been wound up and pushed into this little barrel. Now, this happens to be one of my favorite parts of the watchmaking experience because you get to wind the mainspring back into this tool and then kind of plunge it back into its home. And I got to tell you, the sound and the feeling that it makes, I love it. It really is just like the most satisfying kind of sound and feeling that you can get in watchmaking. It's really funny. And as you can see, what I've done here is I've wound in the spring into this tool, which kind of acts like a little barrel. And then you get to do this part. Isn't that great? I mean, seriously, whoever designed these tools probably was like, this is sweet. And it looks like I got a little bit of braking grease extra, so I'm going to take it off. Braking grease was that grease I was putting in on the inside wall. And that's because that spring will actually drag itself along it once it's fully wound up. And so you don't want it to be metal on metal. Okay, now we can put the cap back on, and I've got a little tool that'll help me secure it into place as well. This just applies even pressure along the top of it. You can just do this with tweezers too, but I like this little tool for it and it was cheap, so why not? There we go. So now the barrel's back assembled and ready to go. And that means that we can begin the reassembly process on this movement. Now, I was mentioning before that this is a multifunction movement, meaning, you know, the most simple watch would be what we call a two-hander, right? One that has like hours and minutes. And then, you know, stepping up a little bit, you can have a running seconds hand, right? Which most watches actually have that. And in the old days, that seconds hand would be off center. It would have its own little subdial. But then people figured out how to make it run in the middle. So it's just another hand in the middle like the others. That's called a center seconds hand. So that's kind of cool. But this one even takes it a couple of notches higher. This one has a date, right? So you can set the day. So that's already pretty cool. And then also this one happens to be an automatic. And whenever you see automatic, you might think, oh, well, you know, that means it's a battery watch. It's not. It's still a mechanical watch. It's just a different type. This one has what we call an oscillating weight or a rotor that I'll put on actually very last. And it spins around when you move your wrist, and that actually winds up the watch. So this is actually a pretty practical type of watch. And, you know, again, when you look and you see an automatic watch, I always think this is a watch that somebody wants to wear every day. Because what happens is as you work throughout the day, it winds it up, and then you go home and put it on the bedside table and you fall asleep, and then you wake up and put it back on again, and it goes. And guess what? You never, ever have to do. You never have to wind it. It's a pretty great design. Okay, so now we've got what we call the train of wheels in place, and this is a bit of a tricky operation. I have to put the train wheel bridge on it, and the ones for these Seiko movements actually have quite a few holes to line up. There's 4 for the wheels themselves and the barrel. So it's kind of a lot, actually. Let's see how it falls back into place. Okay, just be very, very careful. No big movements, no big pressure. I'm going to use this stick to just apply a little bit of pressure to the top so that if things line up, they'll actually slip into place. And as you can see, I can manipulate. Oh, there we go. I think I got it. I can manipulate the wheels themselves to get the pivots into place. Hey, that looks like it's actually going. Oh, that's nice. That usually, that actually can take a lot longer. I've gotten a little better at it, but these ones are fairly tricky. So now it's kind of a one-handed operation here because I want to keep pressure on the top of that bridge to make sure that none of those pivots come out until I've screwed down at least one of the screws. And that way I know that that plate will be secure and I can screw down the rest. Oh, but now that I say that, I just realized something. How frustrating. I just remembered that I forgot something. Have you ever done that? So this is part of the automatic winding works. I was just talking about it too. It's called a pawl, and it goes on top and it engages with this funny kind of wheel here, but those need to be in place before I put this bridge on because otherwise I can't secure them, and I'll show you why. As I flip this over, the way it's held on is a little, we call it a C-clip, and this is this little friction clip here. See, and then that needs to go onto that post, and I'm just going to push it on here. Gently. Gently. Come on. Yeah, reinforcements needed. There we go. So that will hold that wheel in place, but I can't put that on with the bridge on. So now I have to do this again. This is what happens when you work on all different movements all the time. If we talk to somebody who was a Seiko specialist, right, they wouldn't make that mistake ever, right? They would be, oh, no, I know exactly how to go through this. But for me, I actually have worked on a similar movement to this one before. I just forgot. Anyway, back in business. No big deal. Sometimes people ask me about getting into this hobby, about getting into watchmaking. I highly recommend doing so. And sometimes people say, oh, well, I'm scared about it. I don't think I'll be able to do it. And look, I'm not going to say whether you can do it or not, but I think you probably can. That's what I don't know for sure, but I think you probably can. And the reason I say that is because the thing that you have to realize about doing this hobby is that there's no time limit, right? You can sit down for an hour and you say, all I'm going to do is put these wheels in and put this bridge on. And I'm just going to sit there and do that. And if I don't manage it, I'll come back tomorrow and I'll do it again. And you can just have a project, right, that takes a long time. That's fine. That's what happens while you're learning. And you go through and just do one step at a time. Easy does it, nothing crazy, and eventually you'll get there. Okay, so now we're getting pretty close to seeing if this watch actually is going to be able to run properly again, because I've got the train of wheels, I've got the bridges in place, and now I can put the pallet fork in. The pallet fork is also called the anchor in some watchmaking circles, also in French, and because it looks like one. And it's a really important piece. It's kind of the intermediate between the balance as it spins back and forth, which we're going to put on next, and the escape wheel, which is attached to the fourth wheel, which is attached to the third wheel, which is attached to the main wheel, which is attached to the barrel. So it's kind of, and the barrel has the spring in it, if you remember, the main barrel. So all of that is the power and wheel side coming into contact here with the balance, and I really hope that this runs. I would so love to get this watch running again. And look at that. It actually kicked up straight away. Okay, it looks like it's running pretty slow, so that's not great, but I haven't really wound the watch up, and it is running. This thing is going again, and that is more than I could have hoped for when I heard the story of this watch. So even though it's running a little slow, let's move forward and do the oiling, because I have learned that sometimes, especially on very old watches, they will run quite poorly until they are fully serviced. And that's because, like in a situation like this, I'm taking off this shock setting on the top. I've got this on the microscope, of course, as you can see. And there is supposed to be oil underneath that red jewel that you see, and there is clearly none. And that means that not only is it dry, but also there could be debris, gunk, old oil that's dried up that is there holding back the movement. So I want to proceed with getting this thing cleaned up properly, and then we'll see what it's doing. So as you can see, I've removed the jewel, and then I've now placed a drop of oil underneath that cap, and now I can replace this shock setting, and that's the top, basically. It's actually the bottom of the watch technically, but anyway. And now I can oil the rest of the jewels. So this is like a pivot, basically. You know, it's like an axle for the wheels, and I can just put a tiny bit of oil here on these so that when they spin, they can spin freely. And that'll leave me with one more of these shock settings to do. This one's the bottom, the other side of that same one. And this one, by the way, is on the balance itself, that big wheel that turns back and forth. And what you really want is for that to be able to spin completely freely. So again, I have to be very, very careful taking off this shock spring setting because it is brass and it is meant to be flexible like a spring. And when you have something like that, you know, one little push in the wrong direction and boom, it's gone. It'll jump away. Now, hopefully you can find it again, but sometimes you can't. And these things are so small and light that they stick to, you know, your clothes, your hair, like they are not heavy. You can't hear them when they hit the ground usually, and it can be very tricky. So as you can see, I'm just trying to be very careful here and replace this shock setting after I've cleaned and lubricated the jewel. Now let's put it on after some heavy regulation of this watch and see what it's doing. And look at that. 0 seconds a day. After being in the ocean for 3 days and after being in a drawer for over 40 years, this watch is keeping excellent time. How incredible is that? This is what I'm talking about when I say don't underestimate Seiko. These are great watches, especially if you're looking to get your first mechanical watch or looking to get into them. Seiko is one of the first places I recommend because they're affordable and they make high quality products. These are not cheapies. Like these are things that will last you a very, very long time for a very reasonable price. And no, they don't pay me to say that. So here's the keyless works going together now. And as you can see, I'm using a couple of different types of oil. This red one that you see here is like a medium viscosity oil. It's kind of the one for things that are metal on metal, but maybe not under a ton of pressure. And then I've got two other colors. I've got really dark blue, which is a grease. And that's what I used, for example, on the stem and stuff. And then there's a very light blue, and that one's the one that I put into the jewels that we looked at on the microscope. That one's very light viscosity. But yeah, these synthetic lubricants are fantastic. Back in the day, I have a watchmaking book that I got. It's basically just a reprint of a book from like the 20s or 30s. And I didn't really learn that much because the techniques are kind of different these days. But some of the stuff that they recommended using in there was just bizarre. It was, you know, fats of animals and stuff like that. I don't know, where the heck do you even get that? And what did your workshop smell like? I wonder if you were, you know, using blubber or something to lubricate these things. At any rate, thankfully, time marches on and technologies around synthetic lubricants have improved dramatically. And that's really great. It actually also helps because they're just more stable, more consistent, and they're better at their job. And in this case, their job is twofold, right? On one hand, it's meant to help the watch perform better. But on the other hand, it's also meant to help it last longer. And hopefully it's doing both of those things. Okay, so keyless works almost back together now. Have to be a little bit careful here to make sure that everything's lined up because this thing actually does touch up against the spring. There we go. And now we can just do a quick check to make sure that everything's lined up and engaging properly, and it looks like it is, so that should be good to go. Now, the parts that we're putting on now are either part of the motion works, which is the part of the watch that controls the actual hands turning, or the calendar works, which, well, you probably know what that does. And by the way, those two components, the motion works and the calendar works, are related. They are not operated independently of each other. You could design a watch to do it that way. In fact, I'm sure there are some. But efficiency says if you're going to turn something at a certain rate, you can add a gear that gears off of that thing, but at a different ratio, and turn something at a, similar but different rate. Like, for example, you could have an hour turn once per hour, an hour hand turn once per hour, but you could have a gear that's attached to it that turns something over once every 24 times that happens. And that's how they usually do it. That's a time saving and just an efficiency thing. Okay, now we can just clean up this date disc a little tiny bit. I'm not going to go crazy on this. It just looks like it has a little bit of dust on it. And so I can just clean that up real quick and go ahead and put the date disc in place. A little bit tricky here because this is the date disc jumper spring. It's actually a spring and a jumper in one. And did I get a little grease on it? Oh, I did. Let's just clean that up real quick. Yeah, there we go. And now very carefully, I'm going to put a tiny bit of that medium viscosity oil on the tip of the jumper. The jumper is what actually pushes up against the calendar. And as the calendar turns around, that oil will get very thinly distributed on that and make sure that it spins freely and that it doesn't get hung up. Okay, now there's a plate that kind of covers up the whole mess here and keeps all those little springs and everything in place. It'll also keep the calendar in place. And as you can see, this uses these little tiny screws. And now we can test it. Let's see if there it goes. It turns over. There's also a quick set feature on this watch. Let's see if that works. There we go. So that way you can set the date to the exact day you want without having to go round and round and around and around and around to move it one day every 24 hours. Okay, next up, let's get this case in good condition because we do need to replace the crystal on it. And I want to make sure that we get the majority of any corrosion or anything that's left. So for that, we use the ultrasonic cleaner that, come on, produces these annoying bubbles. Yeah, did you get this one? And then now it pops? Okay, whatever. Anyway, what this does is it sends ultrasonic waves through any liquid that you put in it, and those can help clean parts non-abrasively. It's a really great tool to have. You can even clean movements with this machine. It's just a little more involved. But now that it's all cleaned up, you can see how dirty it actually got. That water went from quite clear to, well, as you can see, you can barely see through it now. So these parts definitely needed a good cleaning. One part left. Looks like it's the case back. And there we go. So with those out of the ultrasonic cleaner, we can take a look. And yeah, that's a much improved looking case. It still has wear on it, but the owner, Sandra, she definitely wanted things to stay original here. I'm not going to be polishing or anything like that. So now we can replace the crystal. And that means pressing it into place. Now, normally for crystals that we do on this channel, I use this tool, but it kind of bends the outside of the crystal down and then we can fit the case on it and then let the crystal expand. Not this one. So this one has a metal retaining ring in the bottom of it that actually acts as a way to put pressure on the outside of the case to increase the waterproofness of it, water resistance. And that just needs to be pressed into place with my crystal press. So this one's just getting pushed straight down, nice and gentle. And there we go, a brand new crystal, and it looks much, much better, especially for when we get to show off that really nice dial. As you can see, the case looks much improved. Not all of the corrosion's gone, but you can't, I mean, without getting the abrasives out, you're not going to get all of it, and this is certainly nothing to worry about. This is a stainless steel case, and it'll be fine. Now, though, I do need to put on the bezel that goes around the outside of the crystal and helps keep it intact. And there we go. Again, it's just a firm but gentle press to get that bezel seated properly. And now we have a case, and it looks nice. It's a good looking case. Okay, we can put a little dial washer on here before replacing the dial on the case. All right, we'll secure the dial. And then next up, we need to make sure that the calendar is right at midnight, because at midnight is when the calendar is supposed to turn over from one day to the next, which is right there. And that lets me know where to put the hands, right? On a watch that doesn't have a calendar, you can put the hour hand wherever you want as long as it's pointed at an hour, right? And then if you put the minute hand up at the 12 o'clock position, as long as the hour hand is pointing at any hour, then you're good to go. But on a calendar watch, you can't do that, because the calendar needs to turn over at a certain point so that you know what day it is. And if you just put this randomly, that might happen in the middle of the day and you look down and think it was tomorrow and miss your meeting or whatever. So the way we do it is this way. We put the movement into the position where it has just turned over. That's midnight. And then we put the hands on accordingly. And that's what I'm doing here. And we can even give it a quick check here as it sits. And ooh, really close. Nice work. Turns over to the 19th in this case. And that means that now we can put the running seconds hand on. Gently. Don't need to force anything in watchmaking. It's very rare that you have to apply any real pressure or effort into something like that. One more quick check to make sure it's turning over properly, and bingo, looks great. It's exactly what I wanted to see. And now we can case this thing up. So first we'll put the movement back in the case itself. And we've only got a couple of more steps to do before we are finished with this restoration. And I got to say, I'm so happy that this thing was still in good shape in here. When she told me what this watch had been through, you know, my imagination ran wild. It could have been any amount of damage in here, anything I would have believed. And we got really one of the best case scenarios. The only issue was that the winding stem was rusted in, but we were able to get that out. Here's that automatic rotor that I told you about earlier too. I said I'm going to put it on last. Well, there it is, getting put on last. And as you can see, as it spins around, it actually winds up the watch. It's really cool. It also doesn't matter which direction it spins, which is a neat design thing too. Okay, that looks good to me. And now we can put the case back on as well and take a look at what we have done. The one last thing that I do need to do is deal with the strap, right? Because the strap, look at that. Wow, that looks great. Really great. I mean, dang, I am super impressed by how well this watch has held up. Just from a kind of watchmaking standpoint, it's just incredible. So this is a strap that Sandra sent it to me on. And as it is the original strap to the watch, I'm going to send that back to her with the watch itself. But for day-to-day wear, I've chosen this two-piece NATO, it's called. It's like a kind of a ballistic nylon strap. And it's one that I use a lot and love. And I figured that this is one that her dad might have picked out as well, because it's the type of strap you could wear while doing hard work and that kind of thing. Wow. I mean, I have to say this thing exceeded my expectations by a lot. I mean, look at that watch. Is that not just gorgeous? I feel really lucky to have had a chance to work on this watch. And I'm really grateful that you took some of your time to spend with me as I restored it. You know, whenever I hear people say, what's a big deal? It's just a watch. Who cares? You know, this is the type of watch that makes me remember that they are a big deal and they really do matter. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.